Before dawn broke over North Carolina in March of 1997, a police captain was cutting through the dark outskirts of a small town on patrol when something ahead arrested his attention. A Jeep shouldered on the highway, headlights burning. The vehicle carried enough suspicion that the captain swung his car over and approached on foot. Closer now, he registered two things simultaneously. The engine was still turning, and the driver's side window hung open. But when he rounded to that side of the vehicle, the seat was empty. No one. Then, in the silence that followed, a cell phone resting on the passenger seat began to ring. But before we step into what that phone call revealed, if unresolved darkness, drawn out in narrative, is what pulls you back to a screen at night, then you've already found your corner of the internet. That's the only territory we occupy here, and we return to it 2, 3, sometimes 4 times every week. So if that matters to you, take a moment with the like button before you disappear into the story. Subscribe. Turn on every notification, because what follows will not be the last thing we bring you. Now, let's go back to that highway. In the early morning hours of Saturday, March 29, 1997, a blonde 26-year-old waitress named Kim Medlin moved through a topless bar in Charlotte, North Carolina, carrying a tray of filet mignon, dressed in a leotard and tights. She threaded between tables, past the low ceiling of cigar smoke, past the stage where the entertainment continued without pause. Kim worked the men's club 3 or 4 nights a week, and on the whole, the arrangement suited her. The pay was real. The night hours kept her days unoccupied, and those daylight hours belonged entirely to the two things that actually mattered to her: her horses, and the house she was still in the process of making her own. Kim and her husband Bridger had acquired a 7-acre plot outside the nearby town of Monroe, where Bridger had grown up, and over the course of a year they had built something from nothing: a home, a barn for their 3 horses. The construction had finally closed behind them, and now the quieter work had begun. Boxes still needed opening, walls still waited for pictures. So when Kim glanced up at the clock from across the room and clocked less than an hour remaining in her shift, the relief that moved through her was immediate. 3 full days stretched ahead. She turned back toward the table of middle-aged businessmen, delivered her smile, and went to check the rest of her section. An hour later, just past 2 a.m., Kim pushed through the bar's rear exit, now wrapped in a baggy sweatshirt over her uniform, calling a goodbye back toward her coworkers as the door swung shut. Her red Jeep waited along the side of the building. She dropped in behind the wheel, set her purse down on the cow-print seat cover on the passenger seat, started the engine, pulled up some music, and pointed herself toward home, an hour's drive south. 30 minutes into that drive, Kim rolled down Old Charlotte Highway, a 2-lane stretch of road that thinned out and went quiet at this hour. She had once found the commute meditative. Lately, it unsettled her. The reason was specific. Several weeks prior, while driving this same road at this same time of night, another vehicle had climbed up behind her, close, aggressive, laying on the horn for no visible reason. Kim had convinced herself it was a customer from the club, someone who had watched her work, waited, and followed. The fear that understanding produced was sharp enough that she had pulled directly into a convenience store parking lot, specifically because a police car was sitting in it, and walked straight to the officer on scene to ask for help. He had taken the report seriously. He had broadcast over the police radio, asking other officers to watch for Kim's car on her working nights in case the problem returned. That road rager had never been identified, but knowing the department had her on their radar gave Kim something to hold on to. Still, because the threat remained uncaught, the highway at 3 a.m. still made her chest tighten. So tonight, to steady herself, she reached into her purse and called her husband, Bridger. He picked up and told her he was already moving, still on his way back from a prom 2 hours out where he'd been hired to DJ, but nearly home now. They talked for a few minutes. Then Bridger told her he was turning into their driveway and would call her right back once he was inside. Kim said fine. They hung up. She kept driving. About 15 minutes later, just before 3 a.m., her phone rang. Bridger, as promised. He asked how far out she was. She told him she was just passing Union Station Restaurant, which put her roughly 20 minutes from the house. He said he was exhausted and heading to bed. In case he was already gone by the time she pulled in, he said goodnight. Kim said goodnight back. She set the phone down on the passenger seat. And then, just as her eyes returned to the road ahead, an abrupt wall of light exploded in her rearview mirror. She looked up. Headlights, directly behind her, and closing. An hour later, Bridger Medlin jolted awake and his eyes found the clock on the nightstand. 3:59 a.m. He had spoken to Kim 60 minutes ago. She should have been through the front door 40 minutes after that call. The house was still. He pulled himself out of bed and moved through every room, both floors. Nothing. No Kim. Then he went to the window. The driveway was empty. Her Jeep wasn't there. Bridger moved fast to the kitchen, lifted the phone and dialed her cell. It rang. Once. Twice. Then a voice answered, male, unfamiliar. Bridger asked who he was speaking to. The man identified himself as a police officer with the Monroe Public Safety Department. Bridger asked the only question that mattered. Where is my wife? The officer told him plainly. He didn't know. He had come across a red Jeep idling on the shoulder of the road, found a phone inside it ringing, and answered. But there was no one there. The Jeep was empty. A few minutes later, just past 4 a.m. on March 29, 1997, Assistant Chief Bobby Hulk of the Monroe Public Safety Department was pushing north along Old Charlotte Highway, scanning the roadside. He passed parking lots and darkened houses until the town fell away behind him and the road opened into the outskirts. Then he found what he was looking for. A red Jeep parked on the opposite shoulder, a patrol car sitting behind it, lights cutting the dark. Hulk pulled a U-turn and stopped. Captain David Simpson was already standing there waiting. Simpson walked him through it. He had found the Jeep idling on the shoulder roughly 15 minutes earlier, headlights on, engine running, window down, no one inside. A cell phone on the passenger seat had begun ringing, and on instinct, he had answered it. The caller was a man named Kim Medlin, frantic, asking for his wife. Simpson had recognized the Jeep immediately. This was the same vehicle, the same woman, from the convenience store incident 2 weeks prior. The pieces locked together fast. Bridger calling, Kim's car, Kim nowhere. Hulk recognized the name. He actually knew Bridger. He pulled out his flashlight and stepped toward the Jeep. What he found inside stopped him. A wallet, lying open on the passenger seat, cash still in it, credit cards still slotted in place, but the clear window where a driver's license would sit, empty, pulled out deliberately by the look of it. Their first read was procedural. Maybe Kim had been pulled over and handed her license to an officer, but Monroe's department was small, the overnight roster was thin. Hulk turned to Simpson and asked directly, had any on-duty officer conducted a traffic stop that night? Simpson had already checked. The answer was no, not one stop. That absence landed heavily. It raised an uglier possibility that someone had posed as an officer to get Kim out of her car. Blue light bandits. It had happened before, scattered across the region, years of reports, mostly targeting women driving alone at night. Rare, but documented. Hulk held the theory at arm's length. He wasn't prepared to commit to it yet. Then, headlights swept the highway and a black pickup truck rolled to a stop behind Hulk's car. A tall, blond man climbed out of the driver's seat, moving with the tight urgency of someone barely containing themselves. Hulk recognized him immediately. Bridger. His face was drawn, his eyes wild. He demanded to know what had happened to his wife. Hulk told him to slow down, that they were working the scene, that they were trying to find answers. He offered the most grounded possibility available. No broken windows, no slashed tires, no visible sign of a struggle at the Jeep. Maybe Kim had experienced mechanical trouble and gone looking for help on foot. Bridger didn't wait for permission. He stepped past Hulk, lowered himself into the Jeep's driver's seat, dropped it into drive, rolled it a few inches forward, then reversed it back to its original position. The car moved without complaint. He climbed back out, his point made without a word spoken. Hulk was irritated, but he couldn't argue with what Bridger had just demonstrated. He walked back to his patrol car and radioed for reinforcements, more officers, and a police dog to track Kim's scent in case she had left the area on foot. 2 more units arrived within minutes. Officers deployed with the dog, which moved into the Jeep first, pulling in the scent from Kim's belongings. Then it hit the ground and began to move. Hulk told Bridger firmly to stay with his truck, and then followed the officers and the animal down the road, roughly 100 yards before the dog turned sharply onto a private driveway. They followed it up through the dark toward a small house tucked back in the tree line, running parallel to the highway. The dog tracked directly to the garage wall and stopped. The trail ended there. Hulk rang the doorbell. A man answered, awake, composed, unsurprised in a way that registered. His name was Nathan Hargett. Around 3:45 a.m., he told them something had woken him, a car he didn't recognize, loitering near his garage, Texas plates. And in the back seat, a woman with blonde hair. Hulk asked for consent to search the property. Nathan gave it without hesitation. While officers moved through the interior of the house, Hulk crossed to the garage alone, found a side door unlocked, and pushed inside. His flashlight swept across the space. A truck, garden tools, bare walls. No Kim. No sign of a struggle. No indication anyone had been there at all. By the time dawn arrived around 6 a.m., the case had formally graduated to a missing persons investigation. Search teams, officers, and community volunteers together began combing the woods flanking Old Charlotte Highway. Back at the station, Hulk and Simpson sat down with the overnight dispatcher, looking for anything that might have slipped through. A traffic stop, a suspicious vehicle call, anything. The dispatcher had nothing that fit. But there had been one incident logged in the area that night, around 2 a.m., roughly an hour before Kim was last heard from. A car had gone into a ditch not far from where the Jeep was later found. The responding officer had been car 491, Officer Josh Griffin, a young rookie. Hulk called him directly. Griffin said his shift had been winding down around the time he fielded that call. He had waited with the driver, called for a tow truck, and when it arrived, somewhere just past 2:30 a.m., he had gone home. Nothing unusual, nothing to report. Hulk set the phone down, unsatisfied but not yet alarmed by the answer. Bridger had last spoken to Kim around 3 a.m. If Griffin was already clear of the scene by 2:30, the timelines didn't intersect. The stranded car was almost certainly unconnected. But the road rage incident still pulled at him. He asked Simpson to go back and pull the original report from March 15th, the night Kim had flagged them down. Long shot? Maybe. But Hulk wanted to know whether the same driver could have returned. About half an hour later, Hulk sat at his desk with a copy of the road rage report spread open in front of him. Filed in the early morning hours of Saturday, March 15th, exactly 2 weeks before Kim's disappearance to the day. According to the report, Kim had pulled into a convenience store and flagged down Captain David Simpson and his partner that night. That partner was Officer Roger Griffin, Josh Griffin's father. Simpson and Roger Griffin had caught up with a harassing vehicle further down the road. 2 men inside, Eric Williams and George Connell, who claimed the confusion was mutual, that they had believed Kim was the one flashing lights at them. To Simpson and Roger Griffin, the whole thing had read as a misunderstanding. They had cut the men loose. Hulk, reading that same report now through an entirely different lens, knew he needed to speak to Eric and George regardless. He tracked down their contact information and called them both. Their alibis for the night of Kim's disappearance were solid, airtight. Neither man was viable. But something about the timing refused to release him. Kim had vanished from the same road, at the same hour, on the same night of the week, exactly 2 weeks after that incident. The symmetry was too precise to dismiss as coincidence, even if he couldn't yet explain it. Just after sunset on Sunday, March 30th, Hulk turned his car down Westwood Industrial Drive, a dead-end stretch of road at the edge of town, roughly 2 miles from where Kim's Jeep had been recovered. Ahead, he could see the blue and red pulse of parked patrol cars sitting at the far end of the street. He pulled in behind them and stepped out. He walked into the tree line, following the sweep of flashlight beams moving through the dark ahead. Then police tape appeared between the trunks, officers stringing it in a wide perimeter around a small clearing. And there, on the ground at the center of that clearing, a pair of feet in sneakers protruded from beneath a layered mound of roofing shingles and branches. Earlier that evening, 2 men participating in the community search effort had called it in. They had found a body. They had not touched it. Now, with Hulk on the ground, the forensics team began carefully removing the shingles and debris. He crouched down, clicked on his flashlight, and looked. It was a woman. It was Kim Medlin. She was 26 years old, and she was dead. She was dressed in shorts, a bra, and a sweatshirt that had been wrenched over her head. One side of her face bore severe blunt force trauma. Her neck carried cuts and bruising consistent with strangulation. Her knees were scraped raw. Her necklace remained. Her wedding ring remained. Whoever had done this had not come for her valuables. Hulk stood back as the forensics team worked to free Kim's sweatshirt from around her wrists, preparing to collect fingernail clippings for potential DNA transfer. As one of the officers moved to seal the sweatshirt inside an evidence bag, Hulk caught something in the beam of his flashlight and called out sharply for the officer to stop. He stepped in close and directed the light across the fabric. There, pressed into the material with unmistakable definition, was a shoe print. He told the team to bag the sweatshirt separately and route it to the crime lab. He needed the size and manufacture of that sole identified. But even while those results were still pending, 2 things were already pulling the investigation into sharper focus. The first was geography. Westwood Industrial Drive carried a quiet local reputation, known around Monroe as Lover's Lane, a removed and deliberate destination for people seeking privacy. The fact that Kim's killer had chosen this specific location to dispose of her body suggested someone who knew the area, someone local. The second was the Jeep. No broken glass, no slashed rubber, no physical evidence that Kim had resisted getting out of her vehicle. That absence spoke loudly. Hulk did not read it as the scene of a stranger abduction. He read it as the scene of a departure. Someone Kim had recognized, someone she had trusted enough to step out of her car for, in the dark, at 3 a.m. On Monday, March 31st, Hulk sat across a table from his friend and his first murder suspect, Bridger Medlin. Bridger had been present at the margins of this investigation from the moment Kim's Jeep was found. He had interfered with the crime scene within minutes of arriving. He had been emotional, volatile, and insistent in ways that could read as grief or could read as something else entirely. And now Hulk had been told something that directly challenged Bridger's account of that night. A police officer reported seeing Bridger's black pickup truck moving through the center of Monroe around 2:30 a.m. Nowhere near his house, nowhere near the route home from his DJing gig. Bridger, when Hulk laid it out, did not absorb the question quietly. He erupted. He told Hulk that he could not believe this, that at a moment like this, with his wife dead, he was sitting across from someone calling him a liar. He hadn't touched Kim, he hadn't done anything. And he pushed back hard on the direction of the investigation, pointing at the things Hulk's own team had documented: the rolled-down window, the missing driver's license, the complete absence of a struggle at the Jeep. All of it, Bridger argued, pointed toward a manufactured traffic stop, a predator impersonating law enforcement. He knew his wife. He said it with the weight of someone who needed it believed. Kim would never have stepped out of her car for a stranger, not after what happened 2 weeks before. She was frightened, she was already on edge. She would not have done that for someone she didn't know or didn't trust. Hulk walked out of that interrogation room with no grounds to hold him. He ordered his team to pull surveillance footage from around Monroe covering the early hours of March 29th. If Bridger was driving through town when he claimed to be in bed, there would be a record of it. But until that footage came back, Bridger walked. After Bridger left, Hulk sat with the two possibilities that now occupied the same space in his thinking. The first, Bridger, someone Kim knew and would have stepped out of her car for without hesitation. The second, a uniformed predator, someone Kim would have felt compelled to obey, regardless of recognition. That police radio bulletin from 2 weeks prior came back to him. The one dispatched after the road rage incident on March 15th, asking officers to watch for Kim's Jeep on her regular working nights. Police scanners were not encrypted. Anyone with a receiver could have been listening, and what they would have heard amounted to a road map. This woman, this vehicle, this road, these hours, alone. Hulk picked up the phone and began working through other departments across the region. He found 2 recent reports of blue light bandits targeting women on isolated roads. One suspect had already been arrested and was incarcerated on the night Kim was killed. The other had never been found. By April 4th, the leads that had opened the investigation were closing one by one. Surveillance footage from Monroe on the night of the disappearance showed no sign of Bridger's truck moving through town until 4 a.m., after Kim's Jeep had already been discovered, which appeared to confirm what Bridger had told them. The officer who reported seeing him earlier seemed to have been mistaken. Hulk crossed Bridger's name off the list. Outreach to Kim's manager and colleagues at the bar produced nothing actionable. No known problems with customers, no one who had flagged concerns. Then, a new witness surfaced, a man who worked a night shift at a business close to where the Jeep was found. He had left work just before 3 a.m. on the night Kim disappeared. While waiting to pull onto Old Charlotte Highway, he had watched her red Jeep pass. And then, almost immediately after, he had watched a vehicle traveling in the opposite direction execute a sharp, sudden 3-point turn and accelerate hard after the Jeep. The car had lights mounted on the roof, reflective tape across the rear. He had taken it for a police vehicle, though he hadn't been close enough to confirm the markings. Every Monroe officer on duty that night remained accounted for. Not one had conducted a traffic stop. But the witness account now sat directly alongside the blue light bandit theory and gave it structural weight. Hulk spent the next several days trying to trace the second unidentified bandit from the regional reports. Every avenue closed. No one had seen anything that could move the search forward. Then his phone rang. The forensics lab. The shoe print. Hulk leaned forward as the expert walked him through the results. The tread pattern was distinctive, a sharp V configuration, clean and reproducible. The lab had traced it to a specific model produced by the Thorogood Company, a manufacturer of uniform and military-grade footwear. That particular model was issued as standard equipment to officers of the Monroe Public Safety Department. Kim's killer was not impersonating a police officer. Kim's killer was a police officer. Based on the shoe print analysis, witness testimony, and the full body of forensic evidence collected across the investigation, this is what police believe happened to Kim Medlin in the early hours of March 29, 1997. The killer had been moving through the dark for hours that night, prowling Old Charlotte Highway, running manufactured stops on women driving alone, pulling them over for invented infractions or for nothing at all. And then, somewhere along that two-lane stretch of road, headlights swept past that he recognized immediately. A red Jeep. The same red Jeep he had been cataloging for weeks. The same vehicle that came down this road several nights a week, always late, always carrying the same young blonde woman behind the wheel. He had been watching it, accumulating it, constructing something in his mind around it. And somewhere in the hours before dawn on March 29, 1997, that construction reached a conclusion. He pulled a hard three-point turn and pushed his vehicle after the Jeep. Then he hit his lights. The Jeep slowed and eased onto the shoulder. He stepped out and walked to the driver's side window. Kim Medlin looked up at him, a uniformed officer, a figure of institutional authority, and she did what anyone would do. She rolled down her window. She produced her driver's license. She asked, with measured politeness, what the problem was. He told her to get out of the car. Kim complied. She was confused, visibly so, but she complied. And the moment she was standing on the shoulder of Old Charlotte Highway, he locked a pair of handcuffs around her wrists, pulled her across to his vehicle, and pushed her into the back seat. Then he climbed in behind the wheel. Kim was crying. She was insisting with increasing desperation that she had done nothing wrong, demanding to know why she was being detained, what she was being charged with. He wasn't listening. His mind had accelerated past the fantasy and slammed hard into the reality of what he had just done. Weeks of obsession, weeks of watching that Jeep roll past, and now he had her, and he had no plan, no designed endpoint, no structure for what came next. So he pulled over. He let the car idle while he thought. Then he put it in drive and continued down the highway, turning eventually onto a secluded dead-end road. And as he made that turn, something changed in the back seat. Kim went quiet. He caught it immediately, that sudden stillness where there had been desperate noise. He checked the rearview mirror. She was moving, shifting, working her hands behind her back against the cuffs, and her body was angled deliberately toward the rear door. In his focus on taking her, he had forgotten to engage the rear locks. He reached for the power lock switch, but the door was already opening. Kim threw herself out of the moving vehicle. He hit the brakes hard, the car shuddering to a stop. He was out of the driver's seat before the vehicle had fully settled, running back along the road toward her. She was on the ground, hands still pinned behind her back, no way to break her fall, no way to run. He reached her, raised his flashlight, and drove it into her head. Then he stood over her and stomped down onto her back with the full weight of his body. And he broke her neck. But he was not finished. He reached down, pressed the shaft of his flashlight against her throat, and pulled both ends back toward himself. A garrote, improvised, brutal. And he held that position, bearing down, pulling tighter, until Kim Medlin stopped moving entirely. After that, he dragged her body from the road and into the tree line, removed the handcuffs from her wrists, and covered her with branches and discarded roofing debris until she was no longer visible from any angle. Then he returned to his vehicle, drove home, and cleaned the interior, wiping down every surface he could think of, removing every trace of her presence that he could identify. What he failed to account for was the sweatshirt. Specifically, the moment he had stood on her back, the moment the full tread of his Thorogood-issued uniform boot had pressed into the fabric of her sweatshirt and left behind a print so geometrically defined, so manufacturer-specific, that weeks later a forensics laboratory would trace it to a single model of footwear issued to a single department in a single town. The Monroe Public Safety Department. The killer was Officer Josh Griffin, the rookie who had responded to a car stuck in a ditch roughly 30 minutes before Kim Medlin was taken. The officer whose shift had conveniently wound down just before 3 a.m. The officer who had gone home, he said, when the tow truck arrived. The thread that connected him to Kim ran directly through his father. Officer Roger Griffin, the man who had stood alongside Captain David Simpson on March 15, 1997, outside that convenience store, taking Kim's road rage report. Roger Griffin had learned the specifics that night: the vehicle, the route, the hours Kim drove alone. At some point, those details had passed, knowingly or otherwise, to his son. And Josh Griffin had done something deliberate with them. He had begun watching. He had located her Jeep on the road. He had built a fixation, piece by piece, over the 2 weeks between that report and the early morning hours of March 29th. Josh Griffin was arrested on May 30th, 1997, approximately 2 months after Kim's murder. He was tried, convicted of first-degree kidnapping and murder, and sentenced to life in prison. As for motive, the framework the evidence constructed was this: obsession. A young officer who had been handed information about a vulnerable woman on a deserted road at night, and who had allowed that information to calcify into something predatory. No deeper explanation was ever offered. None was required. The conviction stood on what the evidence said, and what the evidence said was clear. Kim Medlin was 26 years old. She had 3 horses and a new house and a husband who called to say goodnight. She had done everything right. She had flagged the danger 2 weeks before it returned. She had asked for help. She had trusted the people whose job it was to protect her. And the danger had been listening.